Hey, thank you all so much for joining another episode of Celeste the Therapist Podcast. My name is Celeste. I'm a therapist from what I would consider the best city in the world. Um, I like to. I have a special guest, Yolo. Yolo, let people know who you are and where you're from.
Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Yolo Akili Robinson. I am originally from Florida, but family was military, so all over the place. I live currently in Los Angeles, and I'm the founder and executive director of the Black Emotional Mental Health Collective. I'm also a healer, a coach, and a lover of salt and butter in my grits, and a
No
Libra.
sugar, right?
I don't, I want to affirm there's a place for people with sugar in their grits to
Ah,
be and to be affirmed. It's not with me, but there is a place for
good,
them
good.
to be
No,
affirmed.
I know
Okay.
we don't want to knock them down, but when I hear sugar and grits, I'm like, what is wrong with you? So what we do is I love talking to people that are empowering other people. For my listeners who've been around for a while, they know I started this podcast because I became a therapist and realized that I've always had access to therapy because I always had a job. I didn't realize how inaccessible it was and how people thought
Mhm.
therapy was the only way to healing. So I
Mhm.
really wanted to bring people on that weren't therapists and that were in the healing spaces to show people that there are other ways to healing, especially people that look like you and I. It's just been a real passion of mine. So tell people a little bit about your upbringing. It sounds like you was raised in Florida. People say Florida is like another country.
Florida is many different countries. I was born in Fort Lauderdale, so South Florida, which is different from Central and North Florida, right? Like,
Yeah.
North Florida is like Flabama. That's like extension of Alabama and Georgia. Then you have Central Florida, which is kind of like, I think most people think about Florida, Central Florida is kind of it. But then South Florida is like, the Caribbean. Like I grew up in the Caribbean as far as I'm concerned. Like, you know what I mean? Like
Ah.
it's just like it's virtually indistinguishable in many ways from when I go to
Yeah.
the Dominican Republic or Puerto Rico. I'm like, this is the same place. So that's where I grew up. My father was military, and so we traveled and lived a lot of different places. Overseas in Germany, a great portion of my life. Augusta, Georgia, of course, Fort Lauderdale, North Carolina. And so I think that early upbringing, early experience of being around a lot of different groups of people really kind of shaped and molded me in a lot of ways. Yeah.
And sounds like you spend a lot of time in the South. Was a religion or a Christian church a part of your upbringing too?
Yes, absolutely. So my grandmother, who was my mother's mother, who was a big part of really raising me. My parents were young parents, and so my grandmother really kind of like took care of me. Lottie Mae Kyler, rest of soul. Lottie Mae, or Granny Fanny, as I would call her. That was my nickname for her, Granny. I would call that as a kid. She was a very religious woman, but it's interesting. My experience of her religiosity was not, it didn't have the same dimension of rigidity that some other people's religiosity did.
Oh
I
wow.
remember
Okay.
I remember her saying things very early on, like, church is in your heart. It's not really in this building. You know, there were just things that like she held and carried with her. But I there was a period in my life when I was really deeply in the church. I think until I was about like maybe like 7 or 8. And then my father, who I believe had some adverse experiences with the church, pulled me out of that. He didn't like the way I was showing up in that. And some of it, I wonder if he was kind of concerned about the ways in which me as a feminine person was showing up at church and what that was activating. But it also was connected to this kind of like idea he always held, and something he said, and I grew up with hearing him say, was that preachers and pimps are the same people. And he used to always say that all the time. And he really had a very, really, really critique of the Christian church and the way he saw it in black communities. He's like, these are the same people doing the same thing. And he pulled me out of it. And so, I think that at the time I didn't really get it. But I think one thing I've come to kind of understand and beyond, to be honest with you, is we never really went to church after that much in my life. It was I was in the South, so Christianity was omnipresent. Like it was always Southern and Christian kind of like have there's a lot of flow between those things, even if you're not in church. But I do feel like whether he intended to or not, I recognize as a black queer person, there's a lot of trauma that I evaded that if I had stayed in that church, I probably would have experienced. And when I talk to a lot of my friends who were in the church, all through their adolescence and high school and college, and I'm just like, oh, I just never received those kind of messages so consistently. And so I'm still impacted by it, but not the same dimension. So religion definitely played a big part of, my life growing up. I still heard those things, but there's in every black community, I always say there's the Sugar Averys, the Sugar Avery for people who are like, we love God, but we also think this is a little, we got questions about this over here, but we love God and we love the spirit. And I think I always say my family was more of the Sugar Avery folks. They were singing and having a good time. They believed in God and spirit, but they wasn't necessarily in church every Sunday. You know
Oh,
what I
okay,
mean?
okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's I grew up in church. I'm surprised your grandmother had that mindset. That's the mindset to have, right? But a lot of people, I think, I don't want to discount what the church has done for some of the older generations during that time. It definitely was a space of reprieve, of being able to rest and having a reset. But I do see some of the harm. I speak to people. I grew up in church, and especially being Black queer in church. I mean, the amount of people that struggle mentally because of the messaging that was received is really hard. So it's interesting to hear you explain like kind of both sides um, of how it was for you, because it's typically not the case, especially down
Yeah.
south.
Yeah. And I appreciate you also holding, because I think we also have to hold the nuance of the church has and continues to be
Yes,
a
yes,
source of healing community,
yes.
intergenerational community, right? Because it's not
Yeah.
just like I went to this church, my grandmother's grandmother went to this church, my
Right.
auntie went to this church,
Yeah.
and we can hold that, like, yes, the church is full of human beings who have
Yes.
made choices often that have created consequences that have not been desirable, that have sometimes been
Right.
harmful, that have been detrimental. And we can also hold that in the same space where those things have happened, a lot of healing and beautiful and powerful and transformative and magical things have happened in the Christian church and in all religious systems, right? And so I think that that's so important to hold when we have these conversations, because sometimes when people rightfully are righteously upset and enraged about how they've been violated by people in these institutions, sometimes we obscure or don't get to see that, like, wait, there actually is still some beauty and power here too. There's still something else here. That's why people are still returning to them. They're getting something from them. And I think that, like, we can hold both. We can still challenge to grow, and we can still hold it like there's still magic here and still power. So
Oh, that's beautiful. Now you and I are roughly the same age. I'm 41, you're 42, 43. Yeah.
working, working.
So, mental health was not part of our psyche in the Black community. I started, 25 after getting my bachelor's. I decided to go to therapy because, when there was this gap, I took a gap year before I got my master's. Now all this stuff is coming up because my coping mechanism was working, school, partying. So I had all
Hmm.
my, then I had all this extra time, right? What made you decide to go to college for the career path? Because you've been in the field as long as I've been in the field, and I entered in it by accident. I needed a job, so
Oh,
so
interesting.
I started working with people, and I was good at it. And you've been in the field for 20 years as well. So how did your path start down this
Mhm.
road?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so interesting you sharing your story too. I hear the nuances of, like, at the gap year, and then you recognize, wait a second, I got a gap, and I got now some other stuff is coming up for us, right?
Yeah.
That's what happens, right? It's real. Um, my entryway into counseling was not necessarily initially through social work, but really through my undergrad experiences in women's studies and Black studies programs, right? Um, I will always say my practicum really happened in this organization called Men Stopping Violence, which doesn't exist in the same way it did before, but was an institution that was dedicated to ending male violence against women by organizing and working with men. And so a lot of my work there was centered around groups. They call them men's education groups. Some people call them batters intervention groups because there were definitely people who had harmed folks in those groups. But holding space in groups to hold accountability, to help people move through and assess behaviors and choices they were making that were having impact on their families and their lives, and really develop different strategies for coping, different strategies for showing up in their emotions, right? So that was my kind of testing ground, which is really deeply rooted in and informed by the work of Bell Hooks and the work of Audre Lorde, the work of Patricia Hill Collins. And so I came through that lens, and only later on in my journey did I attempt to go to USC to go to my social work degree, right? So I had started off in this kind of like grassroots space where that deep analysis was always integrated into any kind of counseling or peer support work I was doing. It was always analysis of how is gender operating here, how is power operating here, how is classism, racism, and so that was kind of a big part of my beginning. Moved from there, did a lot of HIV and AIDS support work, working with Black and queer and LGBT communities, doing a lot of like peer support, education, counseling education. That's really where my roots begin. And I always say that like I have those roots because largely of the mentorship of so many Black queer women, of so many Black folks who were teachers, who were social workers, who were healers, who were herbalists, etc. And so yeah, that's kind of like my root, and very much so rooted also I'll say in Atlanta, because Atlanta was my where I feel like I really got my community and my skills.
Oh, that's awesome. Yolo brought up Bell Hooks. Great for people that have never heard of her. She has a book called All About Love. It's a really great um, it's great content around looking at how we experience life in different ways. You don't even think about it. I meet somebody on day one and I hear their story and I can tell them what they're struggling with. And when they tell me what they're struggling with and I make the connection, they're like, how is that? Like that was 20 years
Mhm.
ago. And I said, but you
Mhm.
experienced it. And it's the audacity of us to
Mhm.
try to separate. I never thought I would have the level of peace that I had with some of the experiences I've had growing up, because I didn't know it was possible. I wasn't taught it was possible. But I
Mhm.
think that what happens is instead of us grieving and accepting, in our community, Hennessy is the way, weed's the way to go. Partying or even church, right? We said
Mhm.
some great
Mhm.
things about church, but I do think that we try to gloss over, and so we're
Mhm.
trying to gloss over, but the experiences are still the experiences. What are your
Mhm.
thoughts about that?
Yeah. I think about all the ways. Well, one piece, all glory to Bell Hooks. Backtrack and say yes. And if you have not read a Bell Hooks book, I recommend, definitely All About Love. There's a brilliant book called The Will to Change: Men, Masculinity, and Love. A brilliant book for any Black man, masculine person in general, who's really beginning to think about that intersection of how people learn what a man is and how that impacts mental health. So yes, so all that to there. Um, Celeste, what you make me think about is, you know, I believe that like there's a part of this ancient wisdom that has always understood the ways in which we are everything that we have experienced. We are the cumulative, right? And a lot of that knowledge has been lost, and now it's kind of being reclaimed, right, in the mainstream. And now we're starting to understand that yes, what I experience as a young person create an imprint that, if that imprint is not investigated, will continue to color the ways in which I look at and experience the world, right? In my healing journey, one of the things that I've been practicing and understanding, and I have a therapist, but also have a Reiki coach, energy coach who does healing work with me. And one thing I'm learning is how to distinguish when little YOLO is talking and when adult YOLO is talking, right? And so when I say little, and you can kind of tell this with your friends or with yourself, right? When the little us is speaking, we tend to often have very black and white concepts. It tends to be very kind of like the lens of a child, the only way a child can understand things. Whereas when it comes to the piece about like when we become to the adult piece, we can complicate things. It gets more nuanced, right? One of the ways in which I catch myself in my little person narrative is I go to this place of, oh, it's because I'm not enough. It's because I'm not enough. And I hear that all the time. And when I start hearing it in my head, I'm like, okay, it's because I'm not enough. And I feel that wound and it feels very real and it's connected to a lot of experiences I've had as a child. But the adult me, when I started really interrogating, I was like, the adult me is like, how are you measuring enough? What is the metric? Is it enough skills, behaviors, tools? What exactly is the enough here? Are you in alignment? Is it enoughness or is it alignment? Are you just not in alignment with this? See, the adult part of me will get to more complicated thinking, but the little kid in me will stay there and be stuck and cycle over and over again. And so I think that that's a big part of what I'm learning about how the past is in the present, right? Like really paying attention. What are the stories I tell myself over and over again? And if I start deconstructing them and growing them up, do they still stand? You know?
I feel emotional hearing you talk about that. I've been working with so many people over the years, and that right there, what you do is what we need to do. And in order to do that, though, you got to get present. In order to get present, you got to feel. And for so many people, they've been so removed from their bodies and feelings because it's been so hard that it takes time to get to that point. I mean, as Yolo and I are talking about it, it's just like kind of beautiful thing of being able to do that. Getting to that place to be able to do that, it takes a lot of work. One thing I want to talk I talk about is healing, but I don't never want to make it seem like this like beautiful journey because it's a very hard journey. But for people that are on this journey or asking, does this even matter? Let me just deal with the devil I know. Understand that you'll have more power over your life because then you'll be able to make that distinction that Yolo just made. Is this little Yolo coming up? Is this the trauma? Right? Because your mind only have access to the things that it has experienced, and which is
Mhm.
where where he it's not even about just going to college, but the literature. There's a lot of information out there. There's podcasts like this or the Beam organization. When you give your mind new access to content, it can create a new story. And as you're doing that, you're still going to get triggered. Like, I've done so much work over the years and I feel amazing. I feel gratitude for being able to feel peace on a regular basis. But there are moments that I'm triggered and I'm able to do literally what Yola just talked about and
Mhm.
create that distinction. And I'm letting my mind know, thank you for trying to protect me, because that's what it's trying to do. It's trying to be like, yo,
Mhm.
Celeste, wait, hold on. We were here before. I was like, yeah, before, but it's 2024, baby. Like, I got
Mhm.
power. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's the importance
Mhm.
of.
Well, one, gratitude to you for doing that work with folks to help them make that possible, right? And
Yeah.
that, and I really love what you lifted up where you said, healing is not this beautiful, easy journey all the time. It is messy. Your wig fall off. You got snot nose crying. You're a mess. You're finding out all these things about yourself that some of them will elicit feelings in you that don't always feel great.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's important to know too that like I believe the universe, our world around us, constantly gives us opportunities to heal, right? Whether
Yeah.
we engage in an intentional practice or not, right? It's going to bring us something in our lives that's going to, what I use the word activate a feeling or a wound within us. And I believe that when something is activated within us and we feel that charge and we feel heavy and frustrated, that is life's way of saying this wound needs more healing and support, needs to be processed, needs to be decharged, right? And so people are, on social media, I see people say like, oh, I don't want to be triggered by nothing and I should never be triggered. And why he's so triggered? It's like, well, actually, those are sacred invitations to be like, hey, just a reminder, this wound here is still here. This part of you needs some love. This part of you needs some care, needs to be seen. And if we saw it like that, when someone shows up with us that way, we will be less inclined to be like, oh, well, you got something wrong with you, and say like, oh, how can I see you?
Yes.
How can I show up for you? You know?
Yes. Perspective is everything. And I appreciate that perspective. It helps, right? I'm sitting with people sometime and things are coming up and they're like, oh, I don't want to go there. And I was like, I get it. At some point, I want you to think about going there because this is the thing that's stopping you from getting to that next step. So yeah, that was amazing. The way I think some people are going to be able to um kind of think about things differently and do the work, because I promise you, audience, um feeling like everything is happening to you doesn't is not a great way to live life and
Mm,
operate. You're basically
mm,
surviving. And we're always going to feel like everything is happening to us if we're not working on healing, and
Mm,
using our power that we have. I always tell people the mind is one of the most underutilized parts of our body, but the most important part, because there's so much going in and out that we're not filtering through. And so if we only had bad experiences growing up, our mind is only looking for bad experiences, not looking for the
mm,
opportunities to heal. It's not working on the perspectives to not get so focused on the barriers where I don't have insurance to get a therapy, but what do I have, right? Where it's not
mm,
looking for that. But I think the more we start to work on our perspective,
mhm.
and calibrate our mind, it'll start to look for those opportunities.
Absolutely. I
Mhm.
love that so much. And I like to think of when you think about the mind, I think a lot of people think just what's in your head, but I think of our mind being our whole body, right? Like,
Whole body.
a
Yep.
whole central nervous system runs throughout our body, and the brain is kind of like this big host of it, right? Like host of the
Yep.
different parts of it. And so when we talk about like, doing that emotional work, it has to be, I believe that a part of it has to be also engaging our body and doing body work,
100%.
right? I can't tell you how often, as someone who goes to body work and therapy, massage therapy, and does yoga and works out, that there are things that I feel in my body that I can work through on the mat that I can't always work through when I
Yeah.
speak, right? Like, what I mean?
100%.
There's a way in which I can tell that if I'm in there's tightness in my shoulder, it influences my mood. But when I do that yoga, now I'm able to flow in a different way and communicate
Yeah.
and convey in a different way, right? It's all
Yes.
interconnected. And I think for us as Black people, we carry so much body trauma because of what racism has done to us, because of racism and misogyny and transphobia. And opening up that body stuff can feel scary. It can feel
100%.
uncomfortable
Yeah.
for all of us, and that's okay. To this scary, all
Yeah.
of a sudden people
Yeah.
very few of us move with no fear. We actually just learn to move with the fear,
Yeah.
right? Like, um, but I also want to say that, like, even as we are recognizing we have body trauma, all types of trauma or pain, we don't have to rush in and feel like we got to do it all today. Like, you
No.
have people that you meet. I'm sure you have clients, Celeste, people who like, I'm going to break all my family's intergenerational chains. I'm like, all right, girl, we got 45 minutes, sis. I don't think it's going to happen today. I don't think it's going to happen today. But, and we put that pressure on ourselves, which
We
creates
do.
more distress when it's like, how about I'm going to break this chain and I'm gonna let grandma and mama and them figure that out if they
Yep.
do that or not.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I gotta do my part and be grounded and realistic about what I can carry and what I
Yeah.
can't.
Yeah. God, I could talk to you all day. I feel like I knew this was going to happen when I looked you up. I was like, oh man, this is going to be one of those things where I'm going to be that energy transference. And, I wanted to say about the body, and I know your work started with yoga, and my first introduction into being like understanding somatic work was yoga, and I started to feel
Mm,
these things, and try. There was parts of my body that when I was stressed out, like my back would feel like something's on it. Growing up, I was in the ER because I was hunched over. Nobody asked me what was
mm,
going on. They gave me muscle relaxers and sent me home. And as I got older, I started to see like, oh my gosh, the body really keeps the score, literally
sure.
keeps the score. And we grew up because I started hiking, doing yoga, massage, all that stuff, looking at that as white people's things. When I see people running, I'm like, why are they doing that? Not realizing like they're healing. And so being able to introduce this stuff in the work, and what Yolo is saying, all of my clients can attest to this. I always bring in the body and I say, you know what? Sometimes you're going to feel it before you intellectually understand what's going on. And so I'm constantly engaging them into being connected to their bodies, which can be so hard. And I tell them to have grace and patience with themselves. And it's not an overnight thing, but if you keep working at it, it's gonna click. I said, I can't tell you when the click is gonna happen, but because you're reframing your environment, not literally, you don't have to move out of your home to reframe your environment. It's everything you're exposing it to. It has no other choice but to fall in line with the direction that you're going. Like we can really change our perspective and mindset if we are actually inputting new information into our lives. So I want to go into because you do a lot of work around you know, being a man and kind of like, you know, in the Black community, I feel like there's so much, and I have many women that I work with. And even like I've been married for 15 years, and over the years, I've been able to understand some of the ways that like like he wasn't able to speak up, or the way that he may have learned certain things. And then just talking to other men and realizing how much pressure they feel. And there's just too many, you know, everybody got a podcast now, and too many conversation, and it's very divisive um, around men and certain things that they do, and how it frames their like sexuality, or are they really a man? And it's the more I've learned, the more saddened I am, because men are human. And I think about tears, and I think about emotions, and I think about, well, what's happening to those emotions? And guess what? They're turning into medical issues. They're turning into anger. They're turning into the legal system. And you know, some people, when they get into the legal system and they have time to think, you know, they would have made different choices, but they wasn't given that opportunity. And sometimes it even starts in the home. I remember my son is 12, and he wanted a bike. And he was probably like, he's 12 now, but he was probably 8. And he picked the pink bike. And I said, "Oh, don't you want the black bike?" And he's like, "What's wrong with the pink bike?" And I remember thinking like, yeah, what is wrong with the pink bike? And I'm a therapist, and I'm very like, obviously he was able to say that because of how I teach him, but it's even ingrained in me. You
All of
know what
us.
I mean? So
Mhm.
I always share stuff, because I don't want people to think I'm a therapist and I got my shit together. That a lot of the teachings and things that I've grown up with, I'm debunking as well. But I want you to share, because you do a lot of work around like destigmatizing a lot of these things, because it's good for men to hear, and also women, because women also, you know, if you're in a relationships, or if you have a child, or you know, a partner, may not realize what you're doing to keep that kind of energy going.
Yeah, I appreciate you opening up and sharing that piece. And it's also just want to uplift up. You know, you sharing the fact that we all have learned these concepts and these ideas that, at their core, halve us, separate us, diminish certain parts of ourselves. Don't give us the opportunity to kind of express our full range of humanity, right? I remember one conversation I had with the guy that I was dating, and he said to me, "Well, Yolo, you need to let me be a man." And I remember thinking, like, how could I let you be something that you already are intrinsically? What is the thinking that you think that something has to happen outside of you to make you something that you are inside? I have no control over you being a man. That's not even it. Why would I? And I realized, and I share this with a lot of friends, and a lot of people, women and men, were like, "Oh my God, I've heard that before."
I
It's the
have, yeah.
right, and it's this idea that something I have to do externally makes me a man, not just the virtue of my being. It's actually of that these things I perform make me a man, not my inherent self, not my inherent spirit, not my inherent presence. And it's the same thing with womanhood too. You hear me saying I need to be a woman. It's like, but we have to start asking ourselves, why do we have to do something to be what we are naturally? Why do we have to like what is the thing that like we have attached to that somebody else has control over me being a man, me being a woman, me being whatever, as
That's
opposed
so
to no,
good.
this is who I am.
That's so
And
good.
so I think that the opportunity for all of us as we get into, because it's reimagining our world, right? It's reimagining. We got taught by really like, you know, the white colonial system that we came into as enslaved Africans here. This is what a man does. This is what a woman does. And that idea has been perpetuated all across the world in different iterations, right? And I think the question we have to ask ourselves, and men need to ask themselves more, is, do these beliefs that I'm holding help me feel connected to my community, help me feel loved, or do they create a sense of isolation? Do they make me feel on the defense all the time? What are they making for me? This idea that like, men have to be anything. Like, well, men are everything that human is. Women are everything that human is. So like, we socialize boys really early on. We teach boys to disconnect from their emotional selves and like to repress their emotional selves and project strength and dominance and individuality. Then they become adults who their partners are now upset. Well, why don't you know how to connect with me emotionally? Well, I learned since I was 3 years old not to do that. And then we have women who are taught very early on to disconnect from your inner power, take care of everybody else, diminish yourself as much as be small for the sake of other people, specifically men and boys. And then we get women who become grown and then like, we're like, hey, step into your power, use your voice. Well, I've been taught all my life, my voice is not to be used. I've been taught all my life that I should be shamed as a Black woman using my voice. And so then you get these relationships that are inherently going to create tension and tension and anxiety, right? Because we've got these different messages that we haven't interrogated. We're not interrogated that all the messages we've got, and then we're operating from different assumptions about how we need to be in the world. And so I think that when it comes to gendered ideas, and as a non-binary person, I'm a person who I recognize I have been raised and people see me and they think and see a man, but I see myself as something much more, more broad than just a man, right? I see myself as a person whose gender can be fluid, can be Prince one day and Kid Cudi the next day. And then like, the next day, maybe I'm giving something else, right? But I think that like, that's where I'm at. But I also do recognize that I've got all those messages too. And I see them show up in the ways in which I interact with my nephews and my nieces. And I'm catching myself like, what? Why am I trying to teach them this? And what is that about for me? Does it make me feel safe and comfortable to teach them this so I don't have to deal with my own discomfort around feelings? Just questions I have to ask.
Yeah, that's good. And you said something about, how we've all been taught through like a white supremacy lens, which creates this individuality, right? Prior to us being shipped over here, community was huge. And you are big into community. And I want to hear about how you decided to create Beam, but where did this community aspect come from? Because I believe community is healing. When the pandemic started, I remember thinking like, oh my God, people are going to be isolated. Like they were talking about safety, washing your hands. All I was thinking about was everybody's going to be by themselves in their own thoughts. Because the beautiful thing about community is you realize you're not alone, right? And that you're seeing other people that are doing things, and it gives you that motivation that you need. But how did you become so? How did community become so important for you growing up?
When I think about the earliest examples of community and my ability to see how community could help you heal, it was really all Black women, right? I witnessed my aunties and their support of each other, right? I witnessed the women and girls who I went to high school and middle school and the ways in which their support of each other and their embrace of me as a queer person who's very clearly feminine and wasn't necessarily always embraced by boys or masculine people, right? And so it was really the ways in which I saw them model a level of care, model a level of support through navigating really hard things, like, you know what I mean? That really helped me very early on see that we need each other, that we sustain and we support each other, that like, and so I think that's where it starts for me. And I think that was the seed that's constantly been planted and I go back to is like, those kitchen table conversations. Think about like, Barbara Smith and Kitchen Table Press and all those, like coming to the kitchen table, being in the salon and hearing the camaraderie and support around things that was loving, that was compassionate, you know what I mean? That was caring. That was where I saw it. And I think always in my life, I'm trying to create more of that for folks. So because I think we all need that. And when we have it, everybody's like, oh, this is so healing and so great. It's like, yeah, we need that. But some of us don't have that, right? One of my mentors, Suleiman, he's a therapist in Atlanta. He would tell me when we used to do groups together, he would say, Yolo, a lot of men don't have friends, they have buddies. And he said, this is for men of all sexual orientations, right? He said, a buddy is somebody that, you cool with, you hang out with, but you don't go deep with, right? You don't talk about those difficult moments. So you have a lot of buddies, but there's no one who's really a friend except for, with many straight men, it's the wife, right? And so she's carrying all the emotional labor of me. because I don't spread that out. I don't share that anywhere else. I don't talk to my boys about those difficult things. I don't have any other female friends that talk about those things. And many gay men, because the gay male culture can be so combative. You know what I mean? Because and some of that defensiveness and combativeness against gay men is really coming from the hurt, right? The real pain and the real fear of rejection. But because of that, then once again, women become the people who are your best friends that you do rely on. So women end up doing all this emotional labor, right? Like women still holding all the emotional labor. Who's holding labor for them? That's a piece of that too. Is it reciprocal? Not always, right? And so I just think about these things and like how they impact us and how we have to reimagine being in the world and shift them for us to really create a different way for us to be in our bodies and our communities. But whenever I think about who model community for me, it's always Black women, it's always Black queer women. I mean, I'll be honest, my gender concept, how I see myself, the people I model myself after were often Black women. Like I talk about my friend Candace and Charlotte, who I went to college with. And I loved Candace and Charlotte for me because Candace would be decked out in a dress one day, debutante, gorgeous. And then the next day she could come. I remember one time I had to call her because I know how to change a tire. She came and taught me how to change a tire. Like she had that range. And I was so impressed by the range. I was like, you could be so quote unquote feminine and so masculine, quote unquote, and do it all. And I didn't see a lot of boys feel like they could do that. A lot of guys felt like they had to be like this all the time. But being like this all the time kept them closed and kind of emotionally inept. They didn't have a flow. You know, and so I think that like when I think of myself, one of the contradictions in my life is that I see myself almost like very, if I'm honest on my gender, I see my gender as almost like very Black femme, very like, you know, I feel like I'm from the TLC era, right? So I see myself, I'm like T-Bonz with a baseball cap on, but people don't see that when they see me, right? They see something different, and so navigating that difference is important, you know.
Wow. I appreciate you sharing that. I want to say, to my Black women, because you're right. We do show up, and we have this ability to show up, and this is the way we're taught. But I do want to remind, and like you said, is it reciprocal? Making sure, because there are spaces where I'm that person that people come to, and I recognize that the energy is not reciprocal. And there are spaces that I have where it is reciprocal. I come to them. They like, and it looks differently. Like I have it's not just I'm the punching. At one point it was just me. Like I've always been a listener and been able to hear, but I never had a place to go to. So I just want to encourage, as you're saying that, I think about women and how they suffer in silence. I'll see reels about like, oh, I just had a breakdown, but I'm checking in with my friend to see how they're doing. And that may not be a friend where you can talk about your stuff, but do you have that friend or that community? Because your role is not just to be for everyone else.
No.
Even if you're a partner, a mom, and I have a partner, I have kids, I'm a therapist, like I do a lot of work, but I start with me, because if I'm not okay, like nothing else is going to run smoothly. Rest is important. So I just want to say that, because the way that you see Black women is the way that I see Black women. I think we're amazing creatures, human beings, but I also think that we lack the knowledge and the mindset to check in with ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that mindset has been acculturated, right? It's been socialized. I think that like we teach Black women to sacrifice themselves and martyr themselves. There's this concept we teach in our trainings. It's called martyr nurturing. And we talk about martyr nurturing being a caring style that centers the desecration and denial of self as a mechanism to care for others, but also to control sometimes other people, right? And so the core of this idea is that like it's something admirable to not take care of yourself. Like how many times in our communities has it been, we've had this situation where, auntie or granny or big mama's done all this stuff, and people say, "What you need, big mama?" "Oh, nothing. I'm fine." Everybody, let's keep on moving. They don't even stop thinking on moving.
Because they present okay too. We're presenting like we're okay too.
But it's also, and this is the piece that's so important, it is a responsibility of all of us in Black communities, Black men, non-binary folks, people of all gender, to disrupt and to support Black women, disrupt those norms around Black women's exploitation of emotional labor. And to say that like, hey, actually, mama, you're not okay. And this is what we're going, and you're not going to cook tonight. And you actually are not going to do that. We're going to let you go rest. And we send you into the spa. And like, because we have to get like, sometimes we have to be intentional about disrupting that, right?
Yeah.
Because and also honoring and naming that a lot of Black men and Black folks benefit from Black women's exploitation of their emotional labor.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're just used to it. You're just like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm expecting you to do, as
Yeah.
opposed to be like, actually, no, this is actually not okay. You need to go home.
Yes.
You know, like, you know what I mean? We're not going to replicate that here.
Yeah.
But it takes it's a work of all of us to undermine that system. It can't just be on Black women. It has to be Black men and Black men. All of us being like, yeah, Celeste, tomorrow you need to come out. Tomorrow you're not working tomorrow. We're not supporting you working tomorrow.
Yeah.
You need to go take a nap. Take a rest, you know?
Yep. And even in my relationship early on, when we first started having kids, I remember I would be doing everything, like trying to clean the house, work, blah, blah, blah. And then I would just spaz out and I'm sweeping. I remember distinctly I'm sweeping. And I was like, you're not going to help. He's like, you never asked for help. And then I had to start. And I thought about it. I'm mad at him for not helping, but I also was doing everything, teaching him that it was okay not to help.
And also, yes, and I appreciate that. I love that he said that. And also, there's another piece of it, because I see this with a lot of Black men. It's like, well, you never asked, but you sat and watched me.
Yeah.
You sat and watched me, and you didn't intervene, and you saw. Like I said, that's where I see the Black men were used to it.
Yeah.
And so the opportunity for Black men is to be like, when you see your wife, your partner, your mama, or a woman doing that, don't just be like, well, no, it is what it. No, hold on, sis. Stop. I got this. Yeah. I'm stepping in. I'm not waiting for you to ask me. I'm stepping up and being like, hey, I see the kitchen need to be cleaned. I'm going to clean the kitchen right now.
Yeah,
so you go ahead and sit down. That's the work, right? Yeah, that's the work on that level, and also broader systemic levels, you know.
Yeah, and then now that's the way it flows, because I have my moments where I'll be kind of like superwoman, and it's like now it doesn't feel, it feels like a partnership, right? And I think the roles, like, you know, Bell Hooks talks about what we've seen on TV and stuff. I think I was trying to assume some unrealistic role that was not the case.
We all are.
For my socioeconomic status, I didn't have no like I was doing mad work.
I get it.
Yeah, but I love that too. I just want to say what Yolo is saying is true too. Like I talk to women about speaking up, but I also, like, you know, if you have a partner, like, and you see it, like sometimes, because sometimes independence is the way people were taught, and asking for help can feel hard and scary. Like people got in trouble for speaking up, and so it's your job to like step into. So I appreciate you saying that, because I think that's an important piece that we miss. That's where the community comes into play, you know?
The community comes in play. Like, you know, it's the ways, and we have those traditions in our community already. Like, you know, we know, I can tell you how many times growing up, you know, folks we knew were having a hard time. Maybe they had, like, you know, a hip replacement surgery or some kind of challenge. Yeah. Well, you know, we're going to go drop some food over there. We dropping a casserole. Okay, we finna go take some, like, you know, that level of support. Yeah. When she didn't ask for that, well, she ain't got to ask. We're going to make sure she good. Like,
yeah,
you know what I mean?
Exactly.
That culture is there with us. We have that. And I think it's leaning into that a little bit more and showing up for each other, and not putting the burden on the person to always ask, because it can be like, you know, like it's like, you know, I think about with a lot of folks in my circle, I'm like, so what's going on? Okay, so you need this. Okay. Oh, so this is what you need. Well, you know, I didn't think, I guess I could. Yeah, okay, we got that. What else you need? Like, you know, we have to step in and lean in with each other. And that's relearning community, because American culture teaches us such a deep hyper individualism, which is really desecrating our souls and our spirits. Because particularly this new generation, I feel like, you know, I'm grateful. I'm 42. You're 41, 42. We're in the same generation. Yeah. You know, I didn't grow up in high school and middle school comparing myself to millionaires or my body to certain kinds of folks. We didn't have that. Exactly. It was everybody around here.
Magazines. I would look at magazines. That's the closest I got to understanding somebody's stardom. But that was it. And then we lived in the same socioeconomic status. So you're so right.
And so the challenge that we're faced with in supporting our folks who are from that generation is recognizing that they are holding an image of perfection they're battling with, in a way that we just didn't have that standard. Even, and it's not the gap isn't that long. Like, I've dated people like 2 years younger than me in their mid 30s. And I'm just like, oh no, baby, I can't. I gotta eat a sandwich. I can't have 6-pack abs every day. Like, you know what I mean? But that pressure to be that, and also the idea that like that is the only way you are desirable.
I know.
No one will want you, because that's the core of it is, right? Nobody will want me if my skin doesn't look like this. Nobody will want me if I don't have the body that looks like this.
Yeah.
I am only worthy through those things. And that's the pain and the wound that we got to talk about. It's one thing to say that, like, I want to change my body for, for me. And like, it's not coming from that wound. It's another thing to be like, this is the only thing that makes me worthy.
I know. Dang, I never thought about the fact that the age gap isn't that difference, but because social media really took off after we were out of high school. So that's why. Dang, that's crazy.
Because I think we were in college and Facebook was still kind of like,
like, oh, this is cute. What is this? It's cute.
Yeah, we were definitely probably like 8 years out of college before social media became what it became now. So we was already adults in the world being like, who these people on Instagram? It's even funny. Some of my colleagues who are younger than me, who like, well, you don't never share something on social media. Like, I'm like, girl, I'm not from that generation. We don't be putting our business in the street. We're just not from that generation. We don't talk like that with social media, So it's just different,
Yeah, it is. Let's talk about Beam. We're going to end this talking about Beam because this is an amazing organization that you started. Earlier, Yolo said, we do things with fear. I tell people be looking at everything I do. I say, sometimes my stomach be turning. I said, but I've been thinking about my goal. Don't think I'm just up here just like, and Beam is such an amazing organization, which is why I reached out to you guys. But tell people how it started, because people will look at what you're doing. They'll look at how you present and they'll be like, oh, Yolo got it all together. Like,
girl, please, let me tell you now.
Tell him, Yolo, tell him.
Like, I promise you, first of all, no one has it all together. I think Naomi Campbell said that once. No one has it all together. No one. Let that go. Let that lie. Everybody is managing their stuff, right? I always said that, like, I'm never interested in like having people around me who have it all together because it's not real. But I think, because it's not about, because life is always messy. What can happen if you do invest in it? You can learn how to manage the mess better.
That part.
I still got my trauma I'm working through things, but I have more skills and tools to manage it. It's still there. When you don't have the skills and tools to manage it, you like drop, oh Lord, it's all like now you just a little bit, like you got a little bit better, but it's still work in progress, right?
Yeah.
It is not all together. It's always growth. It's always learning. And I'm not one of those people that's on the internet being like, start a business because this is what everybody do. I'm like, child, that was hard. I didn't eat some days. Like, the rent was due. There was situations, okay? Like, I am not going to romanticize because it's not romantic. It's hard. It's grueling. It's difficult. And it's also beautiful. And so, Beam is an organization. I always say the ancestors called me to initiate it. It's not mine, but I was called to initiate it, to help create this thing. And I feel like Spirit and the ancestors brought all these other brilliant and beautiful people together to help make it happen, make it continue. We are an organization dedicated to Black healing and wellness. We have 3 different ways we do this largely. We are a training institution. I always say our trainings, and most people who come to our trainings will tell you, they'd be like, that was a healing experience where I also learned skills more than it was a traditional training, right? They were like, I felt like that was because I got some things. We have our Black mental health and healing justice peer support training. It's a training for anybody in the Black community or who loves Black folks, who's allies to Black folks, to come and get skills and tools on how to show up and support folks in distress, but also how to disrupt things that create everyday distress, right? So it is that tool. And we want to create something for our community, because you realize that we need ecosystems of care. The 30, 45 minutes I have with your therapist is great, but if you go home to a partner, if you go out with best friends, if your barber, if your salon, if they ain't got some extra skills, then what gets reinforced and what doesn't? But if they do have, then you're getting a whole level, a whole dimension. And so our focus is on that ecosystem, right? How are we getting the other folks in there too? We have a lot of therapists who come too, and that's great. And so, but we want to make sure people who are not in that place, barbers, stylists, get it too. So we have programs like that. We have our Black Masculinity Reimagined program, which is exactly what it sounds like. Black men and masculine folks coming together to be like, there are some things I learned about being a man that I want to keep, and some things that got to go. What do I want to reimagine? How can this look different? How can the healing look different? You know what I mean? So we have those kind of programs, and then we have our grants, which I'm really proud of. We really recognize that money is a mental health intervention. So we have a program called the Black Parent Support Fund. Make sure you follow us if you're a Black parent. What it does is we give out generally stipends of $250, just grants of $250 to families, right? Just to help them with money. Parents who are navigating distress, which I think if you're a Black parent in the United States, you are navigating some form of distress, right? And so we just recently gave out $17,000 to 60 Black families, right? So we really try to be intentional giving that money. And that started during the pandemic because a lot of people who were coming to our healing spaces were like, we're struggling and money is hard right now. And I was like, well, if I'm in a position, if Beam's in a position to have this money to give to community, then why are we giving this to community? If we know this is the money, this is the intervention, this is the CBT, the DBT people need right now is a check, right? You know what I mean? So that's what we do there. And then we also have our other grants, like our Southern Healing Support Fund and Black Wellness Innovation Fund, which more so fund smaller, people who are doing healing and wellness work. Like we fund Darkness Rising, which is in North Carolina. They actually support people who are formerly incarcerated with getting therapists. And so we fund them like a $20,000 grant. We have Walk Good LA, which is here in Los Angeles. They are a yoga community of 200 Black folks doing yoga and doing hikes and doing walks through the neighborhoods to kind of promote wellness, right? So a lot of our work is really helping to think, how do we support a whole range of wellness and healing? And so that's who we are. And it's a big team of people. Yeah. I know people see my face a lot, but it's actually a lot of people behind the scenes.
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
And I actually get mad at them because I'd be like, why don't y'all get on Instagram? I'm like, I ain't get on Instagram, but I'm gonna do this part. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So
thank you for sharing. You guys are doing amazing work. And as Yolo's talking, I just want to remind people because I'm a therapist and I believe in therapy, but I started this podcast because I need people to know wellness is not just therapy. And we live in a country that looks to capitalize off of our pain. And lately I have been seeing things around wellness, but a lot of times they're attached to money or products. And, I just want people not to allow socioeconomics to stop them from starting where they are and using what they have. When I was on a wellness journey, I couldn't afford a gym. I was doing yoga on YouTube, watching YouTube and doing it. Yeah. Oh yeah. So I just want people to understand that wellness, it can be going outside in the cold and going for a walk. It could be writing. It could be music. Growing up as a child, I used to write. I didn't know, this is so crazy because I used to journal in my diary and listen to music. We didn't have Apple. We didn't have a podcast. What is it called? We didn't have Apple Music on demand. So I was listening to the radio at night. I would listen to the classical music and it would put me to sleep. I didn't realize all of those things was therapeutic. That was keeping me sane, writing and crying. The sleep, the classical music, sleeping too, because I didn't have access to nothing else. Even now, my 11-year-old daughter, she was listening to some music at night. And I told her, I said, listen, while you're sleeping, you want to, and now she'll listen to sleep sounds, right? These little things are things that are helping us on our wellness journey. So it can feel discouraging when you try to book an appointment with a therapist and they don't have availability or they don't take your insurance. I don't want you to give up. I really want you to think about looking into Beam and seeing what they have. There's a lot of organizations like that. And even if it's not Beam, start somewhere. That's the message I want people to know as they're listening to us talk today.
Ashe, absolutely.
Yolo, your book, 2013. What made you create that? That was so long ago, and I skipped over that. But I just want, what made you decide to create that? Because you became an author so early.
Yeah, taking it back. Dear Universe, that started off as just letters I was writing to myself to remind myself of things.
Yeah.
And my partner at the time was like, "Boy, this is a book." And I just shared it with folks, and it's a small little collection, and people are often shocked because they get it this little small book, and then afterwards they're like, oh my God, there was so much in here. And I think that I always say that's like me. Like I'm a short person. I'm like, I'm small. People underestimate me, and I come through, and I'm like, actually, I got things to say. And they be like,
I
whoa.
know.
So it's my twin in some ways like that. But yeah, that's my first book. And then of course I had a privilege of being in an anthology with Toronto Burke led anthology, You Are Your Best Thing, which is a collection of Black voices on vulnerability and shame. And so I definitely recommend you check that out. It's got so many amazing authors in there. Mark Lamont Hill. There's so many folks who are writing. It's Ron, of course, and other people who are writing really dope stuff. So check it out.
Yolo, this was amazing. I appreciate you for your time and your energy and everything that you do. And the last thing I want to ask you is, what does your self-care look like?
What is my self-care? So a part of my self-care is ritual, right? So I wake up in the morning and I have my sound bowls, which I kind of use rhythmically to kind of clear the sounds in the space. I start off with a prayer for what I want for my day to be, and I have my oracle cards. I'll pull a card for inspiration. Sometimes I also have my some Buddhist texts because Buddhism is really great to me. And there's a Buddhist quote book I pull. There's also a book of Iyanla Vanzant has Acts of Faith. It has all the little quotes. I like to start my day off with something inspirational, right? So starting my day off like that is important for me because that gets me grounded, right? And so like I try to make sure that like I'm invested in how I close my day and how I start my day is thoughtful and is rooted. And I also try to make sure I'm regulating myself with food because like for me, food, I make sure I eat in the morning, eat in the day, eat evening, because I used to live in that life where you just wasn't eating all day and then you're like irritable. Like a lot of behavioral emotional stuff can be helped supported by just having a regular routine around eating, right?
Yeah.
And so it's really those simple things. And then I have my other practices, I love to color, I love yoga, I work out, I love to walk on the beach. But the core of it is really for me ritual and also me practicing building intimacy and trust with people that I love that I can count on and I can support through that. Because that's the big piece. Because the people who I have as friends have saved my life over and over again. And so how can I continue to show up for them? And so we can show up for each other so that I have that support as well. So those are some of my rituals.
That was amazing. Yolo, thank you. You're amazing. I appreciate you. Hopefully I wasn't hard on you.
No. And you're amazing too. Thank you for inviting me on the platform. Thank you for all that you are doing, promoting these conversations, for all you're doing for the client work. I know that work is not easy. So kudos and congratulations for you for honoring your vision for who you want to be and making it happen. And just thank you.